The alarm screamed through every corridor of orbital station. Red lights flashed against metal walls. Commander Park stood on the bridge, watching with steady eyes. Outside, the stars were disappearing. Giant shadows moved across the blackness of space. The warships had arrived. "How many?" she asked. 47 ships, Commander said, her second in command. His voice was calm, but his hands shook slightly over the console. "They're surrounding us." Had known this day would come. Station was humanity's furthest outpost, floating alone in the Andromeda Reach. They were explorers, scientists, dreamers. They were not soldiers, but the Dominion did not care about such things. They only cared about one thing: conquest. She had read the reports from other systems. 17 civilizations had fallen to thee in a single cycle. Entire planets had burned. Species that had built great empires for thousands of years now served as slaves. The method was simple. They arrived, they demanded surrender, and then they crushed anyone who refused. "Open a channel," said. The screen flickered. A face appeared that was not a face at all. It was a nightmare-given form. There were massive creatures, 8 feet tall with scales like black armor. They had 4 arms, each ending in claws that could cut through steel. But it was the eyes that remembered most. 4 yellow eyes, cold and hungry, like a predator watching prey. "I am Alpha the Unbroken," the creature said. Its voice was deep, like thunder rolling across mountains. "Your station belongs to the Dominion now. Surrender. Kneel before your new masters. Resist and you will suffer." Looked at this monster on her screen. She thought about her crew, 300 souls who had trusted her with their lives. She thought about her family back on Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests she might never see again. Then she thought about kneeling. "No," she said. The eyes narrowed. Perhaps he had not heard correctly. No species said no to the Dominion. "You refuse." "I refuse," said. "This station is ours. These people are free. We will not kneel." Made a sound that might have been laughter. "Then you will die screaming, human." The screen went dark. Turned to her crew. They were afraid. She could see it in their eyes, but she could also see something else. Something that made her proud. "All non-combat personnel to the escape pods," she ordered. "Pilots, engineers, medical staff with combat training stay with me. Everyone else gets off this station." Stepped forward. "Commander, the escape pods can't outrun their ships." "They don't need to outrun them," said. "They just need 10 minutes. We're going to give them 10 minutes." The crew moved fast. Within moments, the escape pods were launching, small lights shooting away into the darkness. The ships ignored them. They were too focused on the station. That was exactly what wanted. The combat medic joined them on the bridge. She was small but fierce, with quick hands that could heal wounds as easily as she could cause them. Behind her came the chief engineer. He carried a bag of tools and a determined expression. "We're staying," said. It was not a question. Nodded, "We're staying." The ships opened fire. The station shook as plasma rounds hit the shields. Alarms screamed louder. Systems began to fail. But her team did not run. They moved to defensive positions, grabbing whatever weapons they could find. When the shields finally collapsed and the hull breached, the shock troops poured inside. They expected easy prey. They expected humans to cower and beg. They were wrong. Fired her rifle until it overheated. Then she picked up a dead's weapon and kept firing. Beside her, fought with one hand while blood ran down his shoulder. Moved through the chaos like a ghost, finding wounded teammates and pulling them to safety. Turned the station systems into weapons, venting corridors and sealing blast doors to trap the attackers. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. They had expected to take the station in minutes. Instead, they lost 47 of their elite warriors to a handful of humans. When reinforcements arrived, they found corridors filled with their own dead. Finally, her team were cornered in the reactor core. They had no ammunition left, could barely stand. was bleeding from a wound on her head, held a welding torch, the only weapon remaining. They heard heavy footsteps approaching. The blast doors bent and then tore apart like paper, and through the opening came the largest had ever seen. The Unbroken had come himself. He had to crouch to enter the room. His 4 arms were covered in scars from 1,000 battles, his yellow eyes fixed on with something like curiosity. "You killed 47 of my warriors," he said. Stood straight despite her exhaustion. Blood covered her face. Her rifle was broken in her hands, but her eyes still burned with defiance. "I was aiming for 50, she said. Studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke the words that would echo through the galaxy. "Kneel, human." The command carried weight beyond simple words. The alphas released pheromones that triggered submission in most species. It was biological, chemical, almost impossible to resist. Felt it pressing against her mind, telling her to drop, to surrender, to accept her place beneath this creature. She felt it. And she laughed. The laughter started small, a chuckle that escaped from his throat before she could stop it. Then it grew, wild and free, filling the reactor room like music. The warriors shifted nervously. They had never heard such a sound from a conquered species. His eyes narrowed. His 4 massive arms tensed. The pheromones poured from his body in waves, demanding submission. Every creature he had ever faced had fallen to their knees before him. The chemical signals were irresistible to most carbon-based life forms. Scientists across the galaxy had studied this phenomenon. They called it the alpha effect. But kept laughing. "You find something amusing, human." Voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Wiped blood from her eyes. Her body ached in places she did not know could ache. 3 hours of combat had pushed her past every limit she thought she had. But something inside her refused to break. "I find you amusing," she said. "You come here with your ships and your soldiers. You demand we kneel like you're something special. But I've seen what you are." She stepped forward. The warriors raised their weapons, but held up one clawed hand to stop them. "What am I?" he asked. "A bully," said simply. "A very big, very ugly bully, and where I come from we don't kneel to bullies." Moved faster than something so large should move. His hand wrapped around his throat and lifted her from the ground. Her feet dangled in the air. She could feel his claws pressing against her skin, just short of breaking it. "I have destroyed 10,000 species," he said, bringing her face close to his. His breath was hot and smelled of copper. "I have burned worlds. I have made gods kneel before me. And you, a tiny creature from a tiny planet, think you can defy me." His vision was starting to blur. She could feel her lungs burning for air. Behind her she heard shout and struggle against the holding him, was crying out her name, but eyes never left his face. With the last of her breath she spoke. "I only kneel to bury you." Something changed in his expression. For just a moment, for a fraction of a second, the alpha beast hesitated. Then he threw across the room. She hit the wall hard and crumpled to the floor. "Take them," ordered. "All of them. They come with us to Prime." His warriors moved quickly. They bound the humans with energy cuffs and dragged them toward the breach. Could barely stay conscious, but she forced her eyes to remain open. She watched as they passed the bodies of fallen soldiers. 47 dead. She had meant what she said. She wished it had been 50. The flagship was like nothing had ever seen. It was built for war and terror in equal measure. The walls were decorated with trophies from conquered worlds. She saw skulls of species she did not recognize, weapons that had failed to stop the Dominion, flags of fallen civilizations. They were thrown into cells deep in the ship's belly. The walls were cold metal. There was no light except for a faint red glow from the ceiling. Found herself beside, and all of them were injured. All of them were alive. "Why didn't he kill us?" asked. His shoulder wound had been roughly bandaged by, but he had lost a lot of blood. "He wants to understand," said quietly. He's never seen anything like us before. Laughed bitterly, lucky us, but was looking at with something like wonder. You laughed at him. You laughed at the Alpha of the Dominion. No one has ever done that. Someone had to be first, said. The ship shuddered as it entered hyperspace. They were being taken to Prime, had heard stories about that place. A brutal planet where only the strongest survived, where the weak were food and the strong were barely tolerated, where conquered species were sent to the arena of proving to be broken for entertainment. She looked at her small team, who had followed her into hell without question, whose gentle hands had saved more lives than could count, who could build miracles from scraps of metal. They were all looking at her, waiting for her to speak. They think they've captured us, said. They think we're prisoners now. They're wrong. What do you mean? Asked. Smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had already accepted what was coming and refused to be afraid. We're not prisoners, she said. We're infiltrators. They just brought us directly into the heart of their empire, and they have no idea what humans are capable of. The journey to Prime took 7 days. During that time, the guards learned several things about their human captives. They learned that could identify their weak points just by watching them move. They learned that could turn any piece of technology into something unexpected. They learned that, even wounded, was dangerous. Most of all, they learned that never stopped watching, never stopped planning, and never, ever stopped refusing to kneel. When they finally landed on Prime and were dragged from the ship, was waiting. He stood in the red sunlight of his, surrounded by thousands of cheering citizens who had come to see the new slaves. Welcome to your new home, human, he said. Looked up at him with those burning eyes. She was dirty, wounded, and exhausted, but she stood straight and she smiled. Thank you for the invitation, she said. I think I'm going to like it here. She didn't know it yet, but she had just taken the first step toward bringing down an empire. Prime was a world designed by nightmares. The gravity pulled its bones with twice the force of Earth. The air was thick and hot, carrying the smell of blood and smoke. 2 red suns hung in a purple sky, casting everything in shades of crimson. This was where predators were born and prey came to die. The arena of proving sat in the center of the capital city. It was a massive structure of black stone, older than the spacefaring civilization. Millions of spectators could watch from its seats as conquered species fought and died for entertainment. The sand in the arena floor was permanently stained dark from centuries of blood. And her team were thrown into the prisoner pits beneath the arena. There were others already there. Creatures from the 17 systems that had conquered. They were tall and thin with silver skin, their eyes hollow from years of slavery. They were small and furred, huddling together in corners. There were massive beings of living stone, cracked and broken from countless arena battles. All of them looked at the humans with pity. New prisoners never lasted long. First fight is tomorrow, I told them. His name was difficult to pronounce, so the humans called him Silver. They'll put you against the beasts first, to soften you up, then the real fights begin. What are the beasts? Asked. Silver's face twisted with fear. You'll see. That night went to work. The cells were supposed to be escape-proof, designed to hold species far stronger than humans, but they had never met a human engineer. Using scraps of metal, a broken light fixture, and his own belt buckle, built a device that could short out the cell's energy field for exactly 3 seconds. Not enough time to escape, he admitted, but enough time for this. He reached through the gap and grabbed a guard's weapon. The energy field snapped back, nearly taking his arm, but now they were armed. We can't use it now, said. Not yet. We need information first. We need to understand this place. Spent the following days watching every guard who passed their cell. She noticed how they moved, where they were slow, where they seemed to feel pain. She found the gaps in their armor where scales were thinner. She mapped the blood vessels beneath their skin by watching their pulse points. The throat is protected, she reported to. But there's a cluster of nerves beneath the second arm joint. Hit it hard enough and they'll lose control of that side of their body. And here, she pointed to a spot on her own lower back, there's a gland that produces their fear pheromones. Rupture it and they'll panic. Stored every piece of information. She was building a picture in her mind, a picture of how they could be defeated. The first arena fight came too soon. They took first because he was wounded. They liked to watch the weak ones die. They dragged him into the sand while thousands of spectators cheered and howled for blood. The beast they released was called a Ravager. It was as large as a ground transport vehicle, with 6 legs and a mouth filled with teeth as long as swords. It had killed hundreds of prisoners from dozens of species. Had one working arm and a piece of metal he had sharpened against the cell floor. The Ravager charged. The crowd roared with excitement. This would be quick, they thought. This would be fun. They were wrong. Did not try to fight the creature head-on. He was not stupid. Instead, he ran, diving and rolling across the sand, always staying one step ahead of those massive jaws. The beast grew frustrated. It was used to prey that froze with fear. This human kept moving. For 10 minutes led the Ravager in circles. The creature was fast, but it was heavy. It began to slow. Its movements became predictable, and when it finally lunged at him with everything it had, was ready. He dropped to his knees and slid beneath the beast's belly. As he passed underneath, he drove his sharpened metal up into the soft tissue between its legs. Then he kept sliding, dragging the makeshift blade through organs and muscle until he emerged from the other side covered in blood. The Ravager took 2 more steps, then it fell. The arena went silent. No one had ever seen a wounded human kill a Ravager with a piece of scrap metal. Then, slowly, a sound began to build, not from the spectators but from the prisoner pits. The enslaved species were cheering. Watched from his private viewing box, his 4 eyes never blinked. Over the following weeks, each member of his team proved themselves in the arena, faced a champion and used his own strength against him, redirecting his attacks until he exposed the nerve cluster she had identified. She hit it with a precise strike, and half his body went limp. Then she finished him. Was given nothing but his bare hands and thrown into a pit with 3 arena beasts. He used the environment instead, triggering a steam vent that blinded the creatures and climbing to high ground where they could not reach him. One by one, he lured them into traps until none remained. And fought again and again and again. Each time she was dragged before he demanded she kneel. Each time she refused, they beat her. She healed. They starved her. She endured. They threw impossible odds against her in the arena. She survived them all. The other prisoners began to whisper. They spoke of the human woman who would not break. They passed her name through the pits like a prayer. And something that had been dead in their hearts for a very long time began to stir again. Hoping. One night Silver approached Cell. His silver skin was from years of abuse, but there was a new light in his eyes. The others are talking, he said. Not just the everyone. Even the who never talked to anyone. They're asking the same question. What question? Asked. Silver leaned closer to the energy barrier. His voice dropped to a whisper. How do we fight back? Smiled. It was the same smile she had worn when first demanded her submission. The smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Tell them to be ready, she said. Tell them the humans have a plan. The rebellion started with small acts. A dock worker dropped a heavy container on an overseer's foot. An accident, he claimed, bowing low and begging forgiveness. The overseer beat him but did not kill him. Workers were hard to replace. 3 days later, a servant accidentally mixed cleaning chemicals that created toxic fumes in an officer's quarters. The officer survived but spent 2 weeks recovering in a medical bay. The servant was punished but not executed. Servants were valuable. A week after that, a factory worker made a small error in the weapons assembly line. Just a tiny mistake, easy to miss. But the weapons those factories produced began to fail at critical moments. Ships lost power, vehicles stopped moving, rifles exploded in their users' hands. They could not understand what was happening. These incidents seemed unconnected, random bad luck, but knew better. The message was spreading, the plan was working. In the prisoner pits, taught the other captives everything her team had learned, showed them anatomy, pointing out weak spots and pressure points, explained how to turn simple objects into weapons, demonstrated combat techniques that used the size and aggression against them. But most important was what taught them about themselves. They call themselves the Dominion, she told the gathered prisoners one night. Representatives from every conquered species had found ways to gather in the shadows beneath the arena. They think they rule because they're stronger, but strength isn't just about muscles and claws. She held up her hand, small and soft compared to a scaled fist. Humans are weak. We break easily. We die easily, but we never stop fighting. Not when we're outnumbered. Not when everyone says we should surrender. She looked around at the faces watching her. Silver a elder whose name translated to brave heart, a warrior called Mountain, and dozens more, all listening with desperate hope. You survived, continued. All of you. They conquered your worlds, killed your families, broke your bodies, but you're still here, you're still breathing, and as long as you're breathing, you can fight back. Mountain spoke in a voice like grinding stones. We tried to fight when they came to our world. We failed. You fought alone, said. Each species tried to resist by themselves. That's what they count on. They conquer 17 systems because those systems never work together. She stepped into the center of the group. But now you're all here, and humans and everyone else. If we fight together, if we trust each other, we can do what no single species could do alone. What do you propose? Braveheart asked. Smiled. We break out, all of us. Then we send a signal, a message that will reach every slave, every prisoner, every conquered world in the Dominion. And we tell them one thing, the time to rise is now. The planning took months. Worked with engineers to understand the arena systems. Trained medical teams from every species to treat the wounds that would come. Organized combat units, teaching them to work together despite their different bodies and abilities. Did something else. She got captured again and again. She let the drag her before repeatedly. Each time he demanded she kneel. Each time she refused. Each time the story spread a little further. She became more than a prisoner. She became a symbol, the human who would not break, the woman who laughed at the alpha beast. Her name was whispered in slave quarters across 17 star systems. And then the day came. It began during a major festival when half the military was distracted by celebrations, triggered a cascade failure in the arena's power systems. The energy fields containing the prisoners shut down. The gates holding back the arena beasts opened wide. But instead of running in fear, the beasts ran where teams directed them, straight into security forces. 300 prisoners emerged from the pits, armed with stolen weapons and makeshift tools. They fought their way through the chaos, species that had been enemies for generations now standing side by side. They used their stone bodies as shields. They squeezed through spaces they could not follow. They used their height to spot threats and coordinate movements. And the humans led the charge. They reached the communication tower as the red suns began to set, climbed to the broadcast station while her team held the door against waves of reinforcements. She activated the system that could reach every corner of the Dominion. Her face appeared on screens across 17 star systems, in slave quarters and factory floors, in prison cells and mining colonies. Everywhere they had planted their flag, humans and aliens alike saw a small woman with blood on her face and fire in her eyes. My name is Park, she said. 2 years ago they demanded I kneel. I refused. They beat me, starved me, threw everything they had against me. I'm still standing." She leaned closer to the camera. "They told us to kneel. They told us our species, our cultures, our hopes were nothing. They were wrong." Her voice grew stronger, carrying across the stars. "Today we stand. Today we fight. Today we bury them." Far away, beyond the reach of sensors, a human fleet had been waiting. Admiral stood on the bridge of the battleship Eternal Dawn, watching the broadcast with tears in his eyes. "All ships," he ordered, "set course for prime, maximum speed." But the Eternal Dawn did not fly alone. Behind it came vessels of the Remnant, hidden for generations. The underground revealed ships they had built in secret. The Resistance emerged from their asteroid hideouts. The conquered peoples of 17 systems flew together for the first time in history. And they flew toward war. The Battle of Prime began when the first Allied ship entered the system. It ended 11 days later when the last warship surrendered. Between those moments lay the bloodiest fighting the galaxy had ever witnessed. They fought with everything they had. They were predators born and bred for combat. Their fleet outnumbered the Allied forces 3-1. Their warriors knew no fear. For 10,000 years they had conquered and crushed and killed. They could not imagine losing. But they had never faced an enemy like this. Admiral led the fleet with brilliant precision, using tactics they had never encountered. Human ships were smaller and weaker, but they were fast and unpredictable. They darted through formations, striking at weak points and disappearing before counterattacks could land. The vessels specialized in electronic warfare, blinding sensors and scrambling their communications. Fighters were tiny enough to slip past defenses and plant explosives on enemy hulls. Warships were living fortresses, able to absorb punishment that would destroy any other vessel. Together, they did what none could do alone. On the ground, the battle was even more brutal. Led 300 former arena survivors through the streets of the capital city. They knew this place. They had been dragged through these streets in chains. They had bled on this ground. Now they returned as conquerors. The freed prisoners fought with a fury that shocked them. These were not the broken slaves they expected. These were warriors forged in the arena of proving, hardened by years of survival. They knew every weakness because they had learned them through pain and blood. Commanded the right flank, his wounded shoulder long healed into a mass of scar tissue. He had killed more in the arena than any human in history. Now he added to that count with cold efficiency. Ran mobile medical units, saving lives that would have been lost without her knowledge. But when enemies got too close, she proved that her understanding of anatomy worked both ways. She knew how to heal. She also knew how to kill. Turned the city's infrastructure into a weapon. Power grids overloaded when troops were nearby. Doors locked when they tried to retreat. Automated systems that had served the Dominion for centuries now served the rebellion. Day by day, building by building, the Allies pushed forward. They threw everything at them. Elite soldiers, heavy armor, orbital bombardment. Nothing worked. For every rebel who fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. The conquered peoples of 17 systems had found their courage, and they would not stop until they were free. On the 11th day, reached the gates of palace. The building was ancient, built from the bones of creatures that had driven to extinction long ago. It had stood for 10,000 years, a symbol of dominion power. Its walls had never been breached. "Blow it open," ordered. The explosion shattered gates that had stood since before humanity left Earth, walked through the smoke with her team at her back, stepping over the bodies of fallen guards. The palace halls were empty now. Most of the defenders had died in the fighting outside. Those who remained had fled. All except one. The Unbroken waited in his throne room. He stood alone in the center of the massive chamber. The room was built to intimidate, to make visitors feel small before the Alpha's power. Trophies from conquered worlds lined the walls. The skulls of defeated champions hung from the ceiling. Looked at with those four yellow eyes, he was wounded. One of his arms hung useless at his side. Dark blood stained his scales, but he stood straight, proud even in defeat. "Leave us," said to her team. Commander started to protest. "Leave us," she repeated. They hesitated then. The doors closed behind them, leaving alone with the alpha beast. "You have destroyed everything," said. His voice was tired, but there was no fear in it. The did not know fear. 10,000 years of dominion, 17 systems brought to heel, all of it gone. Stepped forward slowly. In her hand she held a blade taken from a fallen warrior. "No," she said. "You destroyed everything. You destroyed it the moment you decided other beings existed only to serve you." Made a sound that might have been bitter laughter. "We were the strongest. The strong rule the weak. It is the natural order." The natural order stopped a few feet from him. "Let me tell you something about humans. We're weak. We break easily. We die easily. By every measure your people use, we should be prey." She met his eyes without flinching. "But we made fire when we were cold. We made tools when we were hunted. We built cities and ships and crossed the stars, not because we were strong, but because we refused to accept our weakness as an end." She raised the blade. "The strong don't rule the weak. The determined rule the willing, and no one is more determined than someone fighting for their freedom." Charged, even wounded, even exhausted, he was terrifying. 8 feet of muscle and rage, claws that could tear through hull plating, 4,000 years of combat experience driving every movement. Did not retreat. She had spent 2 years studying warriors. She had fought them in the arena, been beaten by them, almost killed by them. She knew exactly how they moved, how they attacked, where they were vulnerable. Was faster, was ready. His first strike missed by inches. His second opened a cut across her shoulder. His third would have taken her head if she hadn't dropped beneath it. She was bleeding, outmatched, facing a creature that had conquered civilizations. But she had made a promise. She waited for the opening she knew would come. His wounded arm slowed him just slightly on his left side. When he swung wide with his remaining arms, she was already moving. The blade found the gap in his scales that had identified so long ago, the soft spot beneath the second arm joint. His body seized. Half his limbs went limp. He fell to his knees, gasping, struggling to understand how a creature so small could bring him down. Stood over him, breathing hard, blood running down her arm. 2 years ago," she said quietly, "you told me to kneel. Do you remember what I said?" Looked up at her with those yellow eyes. For the first time in his long life, he understood what his victims had felt: the helplessness, the certainty of death, the knowledge that strength alone could not save him. "You said you only kneel to bury me," he whispered. Knelt beside him. She placed one hand on his head almost gently. "I keep my promises," she said. The blade finished what the rebellion had started. When emerged from the palace, the suns were rising on a new prime. The dominion was finished. The survivors would face justice, but the conquered species had chosen mercy over revenge. They would not become the monsters they had overthrown. Admiral met her at the gates. Behind him stood representatives from every species in the alliance. And humans, so many humans who had traveled across the galaxy to answer her call. "It's over," said. Looked at the sky, at the ships of the Allied fleet maintaining orbit above, at the soldiers and freed slaves celebrating in the streets. "No," she said, "it's just beginning." In the years that followed, the Galactic Council would debate endlessly about humanity. This young species had changed everything. They had united ancient enemies, toppled an empire, reshaped the balance of power in the galaxy. The archives were recovered and studied. Among them was final assessment of humanity, recorded before the final battle. Humans do not submit. They do not accept hierarchy imposed by force. When cornered, they do not surrender. They become more dangerous. Their bodies are fragile, but their spirits are something else, something we have no word for. Avoid them, befriend them if you can, but never ever try to make them kneel. Retired to a quiet colony world with, and they had become family, bound by something stronger than blood. Sometimes visitors came, diplomats and historians wanting to hear the story of the uprising. Always told them the same thing. We didn't do anything special, we just refused to stop being human. And somewhere across the galaxy, in slave quarters and prisons and places where hope had died, her words lived on. A reminder that freedom was not given. It was taken. It was fought for. It was earned by those brave enough to stand when everything demanded they kneel. The story of Park became legend, but she never cared about legends. She only cared about the promise she had kept.